All right. Hello, everyone. Hi, can you hear me? Great. Cool. Well, welcome. I'm so excited to welcome you all to the opening of the Screenprint Biennial at the Turner. And I'd like to start with our land acknowledgement. I'd like to thank the Mechoopda, on whose traditional lands this event is taking place. Without their support and continued positive presence in our community, we would be unable to forward the cultural and educational work that is at the heart of this event. So it's my pleasure tonight to introduce our two guests, Nathan Meltz and Sheila Goloborotko. And we'll be having a conversation with the three of us, but then we're going to leave plenty of time for questions from all of you at the end. So I hope the students have their questions ready. And before we get started, I really wanted to say some thank yous. Every exhibition at the Turner is a team effort, but this one really would not have been possible without the help of so many different people. So I want to particularly recognize David Barta. I don't know if he's here. Woo! Brandon Hernandez, Katie Bradley, Kathleen Breeze, for all of their creative problem-solving, ladder climbing skills, and installation work this week. And I also want to thank so many of our students who came and assisted this week. So if you came and helped Sheila install her work, can you raise your hand so we can thank you? Yay! And finally, I'd like to thank the Chico State Women's Philanthropy Council, who very generously funded Sheila's visit, and also our beautiful exhibition catalog, which we will have available for purchase. So now for some introductions. I'll start with Nathan. Nathan Meltz is the founder of the Screenprint Biennial, an exhibition and organization that seeks to showcase a range of screenprint-based art applications, from framed and editioned prints to installation, sculpture, video, ephemera, and posters. In his own work, he uses printmaking, animation, sculpture, and performance to comment on the infiltration of technology into every facet of life, from politics and food to family and war. His solo exhibitions include the gallery at Atelier Presse Papier, Trois-Rivières, Canada, the Shercliffe Gallery at Vincennes University, Indiana, Southern Illinois University, the University of Florida, Jacksonville, and Gridspace in New York. And his international exhibitions include the 16th International Printmaking Triennial, Grafica Creativa Triennial, the Museum of Modern Art in Rio, Brazil, and more. And he is a senior lecturer in the Department of the Arts at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. So welcome, Nathan. And our second guest tonight is Sheila Goloborotko. Sheila grew up under the hardship of a dictatorial military regime in Brazil. She graduated in architecture and urban planning, and in her 20s, she felt compelled to leave her homeland as a refugee, making Brooklyn, New York, her home. She received an MFA from Brooklyn College, and after graduating was hired to teach at the college. She also taught at Pratt Institute and SUNY New Paltz, and she's currently a professor of printmaking at the University of North Florida. She's a multidisciplinary artist. You're going to see a lot of her work today, as she's exhibited installations, works on paper, sculpture, videos, and interactive projects in more than 300 exhibitions in museums and galleries on 4 continents, and yet remains firmly committed to community. And since 1989, she has operated Goloborotko's Studio, a site of print and poetic activism that serves as a bridge between individual mastery and community activism, exploring the shifting boundaries of the information age as it relates to multiples and collective consciousness. So please join me in welcoming Nathan and Sheila. Okay, so as you can see from our wonderful graphic and logo up here, this is a really special edition of the Screenprint Biennial. It's the 10-year anniversary. It's also the first time the show's been on the West Coast, which is really exciting. So Nathan, I was hoping that you could share a little bit more about your inspiration to found the biennial and maybe walk us through some highlights from the past 4 editions.
Sure. At the start, 10 years ago, I was just a print artist attending some conference, and I write about this in the catalog, attending a talk by this wonderful art historian, Richard Noyce, who just offhandedly mentioned some obscure experimental intaglio biennial in East Europe. And it doesn't make too much of an impact, but then I started thinking, well, I really like this other media we call Screenprint. And is there a Screenprint Biennial? And this was, 2010, 12, 14, 2013. Biennials were sort of a thing. And so I just started doing some research and there was not any United States Screenprint Biennial. The closest thing, there's a Mesh Tech Screenprint Biennial in Japan, and they only make things that are really small. So I started to explore this idea of, well, I want to make the show that I most want to see. I have a background playing punk rock bands, and I always, whenever I recorded music, I always recorded records that I would want to listen to. And I kind of translated that to art, thinking about what would be the art show that I would most want to see. So then I started contacting colleagues, artists who I just admired, who I looked up to, and started inviting people to the first Screenprint Biennial with absolutely no money, not really knowing what I was doing, raising money, scrappy in the process, sort of again, the kind of, pulling on that old punk rock DIY ethos of you don't need an institution. It's nice to have an institution, I should say, but you don't need one, and you can really do a lot of things by yourself if you put a lot of effort and have a community. And that was sort of the groundworks. In an art center in upstate New York, we premiered the very first Screenprint Biennial, and then after that, it premiered at different places in upstate New York and traveled to the Center for Contemporary Printmaking in Connecticut, and slowly got grants, slowly learned about making sure you got on the grant cycle to apply for grants to bring in speakers for keynotes and things like that, and it kind of got further and further along in celebrating print and having open calls. And I think we had sort of famously a large open call where there was no entry fee, because who here knows about sort of the entry fees to get into art? It's a drag. And I think it's a really lazy way that no offense to people who do entry fees here, but I think it's an unoriginal way for fundraising. So we had open calls with no entry fees, and tried to make it as accessible for artists of all stripes to be involved. And so that's in the nutshell, how we've gotten from there to here.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think I put together some photos from past editions here. And I know in 2022, you did quite a lot of hands-on workshops as well. Was that at a local print shop? Yeah,
so that's actually, the bottom right, that's the University of Buffalo, one of their fabrication shops. So we partnered with the Biennial traveled to Buffalo, where it was both at Marabou Press, which is like a new artist press, and then the University at Buffalo. So we'd sometimes have symposiums at some of the destinations where they're like mini conferences, basically ways of getting your print friends together. And so we have Justin Diggle doing, who's at the University of Utah, doing a demonstration on laser excavated screen prints. And then above that is Red Disc, which is a kind of very fancy wallpaper print shop that does wallpaper based on Charles Birchfield Designs, who is a Buffalo artist. So we're taking little trips to build community, share skills, sort of like the demos that you might see in a printmaking conference. And then on the left was just a collaboration with a local dance troupe that interacted with some of the works that were at the gallery.
Yeah. Exciting. Well, we're so excited to have it here. And I like this photo too because, Sheila, you can see your work in the background there from 2018. And we are so lucky to have you here to install this beautiful piece on the right. In the A gallery here, just next door to the Turner. So I know that there have been various iterations of this work. It's in evolution. Can you tell us more about it and where it's going?
So Thank you. Thank you for all being here, for everyone that helped us putting the show together, and, for bringing me back to this amazing, amazing community. So the work evolves, right? So the work is constantly evolving, and the question is, how so? And sometimes it evolves because artists get more curious in how to push to the next level, and sometimes because the space or the venues itself propose some different challenges. So the work you're going to be seeing today comes from a work that was previously shown in 2016, and it's the colorful installation you see there, that was showed in a museum in Mexico. And the funny part of that, some of the students heard that story yesterday, is I received a contract, and the contract says you can hang work on the walls. And I speak Spanish, and I read Spanish, and I look at it, and I'm like, wait, what? So I send emails, and I got an email saying, oh, the walls are made out of coral. So I was supposed to have a retrospective, and then I stopped and I was like, wait, what is the challenge of the space? Why are the walls built in coral? So I did this research, and I found out that the building was an 18th century building, and Spaniards, when arrived and built this armory space, they didn't have building materials, and they had a solution. Let's go to the reefs and just mine corals and make blocks, make bricks. And it was shocking, right? So I decided that I didn't want to do a retrospective. I wanted to look at the gallery space and react to the fact that that building was created under colonization. And I realized that colonization is exactly that, right? We take someone's home and we make our own. And at the same time, the port of Veracruz, so this museum is in Veracruz, was expanding. And I decided, okay, so let me look at the 6 species that are in the walls of the museum and the other 7 species that are being threatened by the ecocide of a construction of a port, and let me bring this into my work. So I created this installation that wasn't hung in the walls, was hung right in the center of the museum, and then the museum is an open-door, free museum, and people would come and realize that they had a wealth that they didn't see because it was underwater, and they had a responsibility of preserving, the wealth that they had. So those are the times that, the work gets created because of the challenge of the space, and obviously the curiosity of the artist. And then the work you're going to see today is an evolution of that, right? So what happens when you show this work and it travels, and it traveled to the Opalka Gallery and to several locations, and at one point I stopped and I'm like, maybe now it's time to talk about the life and death of the corals. And we all know the life and death of corals becomes, the corals become very blue, and then they bleach, they become white. And at the same time, as I was going through this, through this whole research, I realized that we were about to lose democracy. So I was like, okay, so this is not only the life and death of corals, but it's the life and death of democracy. So the work you're going to see today is the revisit of the first corals, that they were beautiful and colorful, and I managed to use beauty as a poetic activism, to someone that is very monochromatic, but you see types floating in the space that are based onto the Bill of Rights and the 10 Amendments. So I think the challenge and the evolution is how history changes and guides us in different spaces, how the spaces make us think differently, and how our curiosity leads us to different spaces.
Yeah, it's amazing to see these two next to each other, and I can tell you when you actually see this work in the space, you'll be blown away. It's really incredible. And we had many students hand tying, and yeah, it's incredible. And I know that you also recently have shown this work, which I think is continuing some of the themes, expanding into new directions.
Yeah,
That's
because,
gorgeous.
it doesn't stop, right? And I think an artist, when you get passionate about something, you go deeper and deeper and deeper. Depending on you live, you get angrier and angrier and angrier. So I now live in Florida, which is the pole of culture wars. So you get more angry because people don't believe in climate change, don't believe in democracy, don't believe in books, and so forth and so on. So I feel inspired every day in transforming my anger in beauty, right? And using beauty to a place that I can actually bring people together and think about difficult subjects that sometimes we agree, but at this point we don't even hear each other. But there is a lot of commonality for agreeing.
Maybe we should just end there. I mean,
Let's go for a drink.
Okay, I want to ask you both a question, I think, about Screenprint in general. What draws you to it as a medium? You said it was you wanted to see a Screenprint exhibition. You're using Screenprint in really interesting ways in your work. What makes it special for you?
So, who here has done any sort of printmaking? Okay, a lot of people. Okay, so I think I was always a closet painter as an artist, and I loved color. And for the longest time, I was a little bit put off by the lack of color within the binary world of printmaking. There's some people who do it really. I love a color etching; it's amazing, but we don't see enough. So, on a visceral level, for me, screen printing does transcend that binary. It allows you to bring color. Just the way we talk about etching can kind of can transcend the binary with a tonal level, screen print can do with color. And it very much is it's sort of the art form for painters who like to make plans and like to make diagrams. No offense to painters. But then also it's just the versatility. I grew up learning screen printing because I played in bands and somebody needed to print the posters and print merch. And so I come from a very low culture background of things that are more visual culture and less quote unquote high fine art. So there's that, but then you can make installations and then of course video. It can so easily be incorporated into everything, and it's sort of the chameleon of printmaking. You can look at screen prints and think oh, that's made to look like a litho, or it's a very fine line work, and somebody's trying to pull off something almost like an etching. So it's so versatile. It's the chameleon of art, and some people have described it as the mac and cheese of printmaking because it's really easy and likable. But the people, if you look at this, if you go to the exhibit after this, you'll see the technical level is off the charts for some of the people that are involved. So it can be many things to many people, but it can also be the dum-dum. Somebody's printing their band t-shirt or their activist t-shirt, or, I'm always getting roped into just burning screens for the local union or, the New York Poor People's Campaign. It can be just many things to many people, and that's kind of how I dig it.
So I haven't been in the closet for so many years, so not even the printmaking closet or the screen printing closet. So I understand you coming out of that. So for me, I don't know. They're very scary places, closets are very. So maybe the 70s are left, but that's another story. We'll talk when we go to the other place. What I like about screen printing is the immediacy, the simplicity, and the fact that it's an add-on process, right? So a lot of the printmaking process can be subtractive, and screen printing is an add-in process. So you put another layer, another layer, another layer. I know printmakers that when you carry their prints, it's actually heavy because it has so many layers. And I like that idea that you have to resolve what's happening by adding and not subtracting. And I think it's, it just fits my idea of putting more and more. I don't know, I'm a little Baroque Jewish, so I keep adding on and on. And I think it works for me, and I'm very interested on seeing, what happens when you put more.
Can I just add, I call it printing your way out of the print hole. It's looking okay, but if you keep printing more, you'll print yourself out of the print hole.
and out of the closet.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting also with Screenprint, what you brought up. It's so democratic, it's so accessible. You spoke about these links between activism as well. And I know in your work, that's a huge part of what you do. I found a quote on your website, really, printmaking is the graphic science of democracy. I like that one. And I'm wondering, can you tell us more about how you've embraced printmaking as a form of activism? We've talked a little bit about these works, but I have some other images that you could share as well.
So it was funny. So a few years ago, I interviewed for a position in a school for a job, a tenure track job. And I was asked, what do you think it's the importance of printmaking in the contemporary realm? And my answer was like, a print elected the first African-American president, in America. So we remember the whole print, right? And I think the power of it is that in print we can make 1 or 1 million. Right, it's quite powerful, and being screen printing, 1 million takes me 10 days, but 1, it's like no problem, right? We do 100 in few hours. So I think the fact that we can create a voice and with beauty we can actually bring people to the realm of conversation, it's incredibly empowering. And because screen printing is pretty easy, right? You can use the sun, the students can graduate and do anything out in their backyard. And it becomes something that you can do 1 million. And then you can tell people your message. And I just feel like incredibly powerful. Yeah.
I know you've got the Bill of Rights, so this is the same language that's appearing in the choral. Yeah. And
so in this print on your left, so this is the Bill of Rights deconstructed, and when I realized after 2018 that maybe those documents were losing the power, right? So I grew up under dictatorial regime, so coming to America and figuring that there is human rights was quite a novelty. So I really kept the Bill of Rights into a high elevated place, but after 2018 things started changing, and I was worried that these documents were losing power. So I counted the A's and B's and C's, and I burned them on paper, and then I covered them in wax. And eventually I screen printed these images on top of different layers. So you get the 10 amendments on top of each other, and that's when you lose the message, right? And the most important thing for me is to think about the value of freedom and how it is so easy to lose the perspective of something that is, it's so important to all of us.
okay, shifting gears, even though that's another great point that we can pick up, I think. Nathan, you've been talking about the process of organizing this exhibition, and I know a lot of our students here might be curious about what it's like to start something like this. I mean, it's been a 10-year project now. What have been some of the challenges, some of the highlights? What do you wish you'd known 10 years ago when you were starting out?
Sure. So, we talked a little bit about the sexy world of the curator, which oftentimes involves moving lots of boxes. Sometimes driving to U-Hauls full of art across state lines. It's a lot. It's very not sexy. But in terms of challenges, I think people need to organize. Like, art does not come out into the world on its own, and it's up to you to get it out in the world. But you think about, like, what's probably the biggest challenge of organizing a group of 20 artists or 30 artists, it's probably the artists. So if you are that person that's really good at herding cats, like, please put on shows and organize, because there's a lot of, I know brilliant artists who cannot hit a deadline for the life of them, and so it's I think just dealing with artists who maybe organization's not their strongest suit is like always a big challenge. But when you do find people and institutions that do it well, man, that's the best gift. It's actually, so we were looking at some, who here is familiar with Sister Corita Kent? printmaker, 1950s, 60s, 70s. So, she is, we were looking at some of her prints today, and I was thinking about her rules for making, which I always fall back on. And her first rule of making is find a place you trust and then try trusting it for a while. So if you do start making these relationships with artists that you know and trust, it becomes less challenging. And so I think over the 10 years of finding those people and institutions and practices that work well and trust, that I trust in working with them. And remember, and it's things for me to remember too. I remember asking, there's this wonderful printmaker that teaches at McAllister College in the Midwest, Ruth Ann Godolai, who's been teaching people how to make radical political art for probably going on 40 years. And I asked, since she's an older professor, and it's like, Ruth Ann, how do I do this? What should I be doing and thinking about? And she's like, Nathan, just don't be a dick. And I channel that inner Ruth Ann about treating people with respect and expecting respect at the same time. And I think that's kind of like a baseline for a curatorial practice and organizing and working with artists and working with people in general.
Words to live by. And I think, this version of the show is interesting because, you talked about the open calls. You've invited jurors for all of the past editions, but this is really an invitational that's celebrating artists who've exhibited at least once before.
Correct. Yeah, so, there's always an open call. Particularly, it would give me a chance to get guest jurors, people who have knowledge that I don't know. Somebody, like the master printer from a great print shop in New York City that focuses on screen print. Bring Luther Davis in. Bring people whose experiences are just different from mine and different walks of life is really important. That's probably one of the best things about this process of learning and discovering new artists by bringing in a pool of jurors. But so this show that you'll see, everyone has been in a different biennial. I don't want to call it a greatest hits because there's so many amazing people who had to be excluded, but it's just a show of artists who have exhibited before and they all worked well together.
Yeah, I'm curious for both of you. You've seen so many different versions of the biennial as an organizer. You've been a participant. Have you seen any trends or innovations that have been happening over the past 10 years? Do you think this show is different from the one in 2014 in interesting ways?
That's a great question. I think people keep pushing non-static forms and sculpture. This might be the first show that there has not been video. But oftentimes we'll have all sorts of 3D work, and there is, screen printers are starting to think about space. And I think that's at least the artists that I'm gravitating towards. And you'll see this in print in general. If you go to a print conference, you'll see artists that are really thinking about space. I think the constant struggle has been between the digital and the analog. Is something we're constantly seeing. And now, you'll see work in the show, Dana Potter's work, which is a series of dots and lines. The imagery is based off of cognitive science, eye movement capturing and mapping out where people's eyes are looking, where they're looking at art. So people are really delving deeper into digital processes and reacting to them, and sometimes building off of them, and sometimes rejecting them. So I think at the end of the day, I think this is the big challenge for art in general, is, we're coming upon, artificial intelligence making, we're in a world where people have bodies and we're in physical space, and I think one thing we keep seeing is the art is reacting to physicality, because this is not like the digital biennial, so I think that's one trend we keep seeing of, it's the reaction to digital and figuring out what's the importance of screen print in now the 21st century.
Well, I love seeing the idea of having one and a million, right? So the idea that some of the works, it's a one of a kind, right? So even though we're using print, which is something geared to iteration, multiple pieces, etc., sometimes the multiplicity is in many multiple ones, right? So you like in my installation, something like that. It's like, how do you create a one piece, but then you make 100 of it, and then it becomes the multiple ones, but that's conjoined with something else. So it's not only the multiple for the multiple say, and it's not the individual, because then it's still a print of one, but how you combine the multiple and the ones, right? Two different personalities, right? You can have one and you can have many of one.
Yeah, and I should add, Sheila has done her own curating on this subject and put together some really good shows, and I encourage you to check, you probably have this on your website, there's some great shows that on this topic of the generation and the generative aspect of print that I really encourage you to check out, because it's great.
And now I'm going to do a plug for Nathan. This only happens, right, because there is this dialogue. So the minute that I saw what Nathan was doing, and I was parallel creating the work I was doing, all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, so there's two nuts in the middle of many other nuts, right? But you recognize that nut that you go like, yeah, that's what we're doing. And then very often I look at what Nathan is finding, and I'm like, oh, this would be a perfect person to be in this show. And then I think there is a lot of reciprocity. So, there is this incredibly powerful community of people that think alike, talk alike, and and I encourage all the young and printmakers and everyone that I made fall in love with print yesterday, and I can see you. So to find your gang, because you don't have to be alone doing this. You don't have to reinvent things on your own. You can have dialogues that keeps feeding you. So you're not alone in this. Some people did before, some people do after you, but keep sharing your resources and keep sharing the wisdom you collect, because we'll produce more and more amazing works of art. And support artists, right? I think it's very important for artists to support artists. So we are in a society that it's so much about competition, and I think we live in this micro society that is so much about sharing and growing together, so then we can all grow horizontal. There's like some big trees, we are like the middle trees that grow together. So it's quite an exciting place to be.
Yeah, I should just add on that, again, no shade on the ceramicists and the painters and things like that in the audience, but all the painters I know are so jealous of the print world and what we have of like the sharing and the community and the print shops. Like, we are so privileged and blessed, and I'm always inspired by the world of print when I go to some community print shop, and it's like community members, maybe some professionals, and everyone's sharing ideas, and I'm so glad I somehow stumbled into this world.
Yeah, and I know you included this amazing image on the right, Sheila. That's a project that's about collaboration, about the public. Do you want to share a little bit about that? And also, I learned what Wave is made of, so you have to explain that too.
So I'll talk a little bit about the two pieces. So Wave was, so I had the opportunity to display a new installation in a new space that opened in Jacksonville, and I had to talk about climate injustice. And at the same time, I was thinking about what project I was going to be making, and someone came to my studio and gave me a huge bag of styrofoam cups, and I hate them. I usually don't hate many things, but styrofoam cups, I keep having this nightmare that it's going to be a big tsunami of styrofoam cups, and I think it's all Hokusai fault. Hokusai has the great wave of Nakawa, so I keep thinking about this. Anyway, so I look at this bag, and I'm like, those are like dreadful. I need to make something special about this, so then I don't have to trash in the landfill, and maybe someone would take this seriously. So I started slicing hundreds of cups, and I put them together, and I created this big wave that floats. It's very light, and you get to walk in, and as you move, it moves like a wave. And living in Florida now that you have all this this mini floods, so it's a reminder of how can you make something that has no value to you into something that might be valuable to your art community and society. So that's the piece in your left. And the other piece is a participatory piece that started in 2011. It's an ongoing piece, and that piece started from me and my partner adopting our niece. She was 9 years old, her mom died, and she moved in with us. And one morning she comes up to breakfast and says, "Hey guys, I had a dream." And then she started telling us the dream. And I had to go to my studio, and I'm like, now I have this collection of imaginations and stories, right? What am I going to do with her dream? So by the end of the day, I printed her dream in 10 pillowcases, and I put a message on the back of the pillowcases that says, if you find this dream, send me your dream. And I put in 10 corners of New York, and then I photographed people looking and being scared and grabbing the pillowcase and looking around. And then I started receiving dreams, and those dreams kept producing the next pillowcase, the next pillowcase. So I seeded dreams in New York, Mexico, Lisbon, São Paulo, and the UK. And it's an incredible thing because, you know, people actually send you dreams. I also met someone that came to an open studio, and she said, "Oh, I saw one of these in Brooklyn." And I said, "Did you pick it up?" She was like, "No, I was afraid it had a GPS and was going to follow me." I'm like, maybe that's another project, but I'm not interested on surveillance is my thing. So anyway, it's a project that is ongoing, and it's quite exciting. So the idea is to print 100, an edition of 10, and it will be 1,000, and then her dream as being the first one. So it's called 1001dreams.net. You can send me your dreams, and sometimes people send me conscious dreams, right? I wish the planet will be a better place. So when I got those, I was like, oh, maybe now I included them in the website, so I'm not in the blog, so I'm not doing conscious dreams, but I'm not going to be the censor that doesn't allow people to tell me that, you know, whatever conscious dreams you have as well. So it's an ongoing thing, and check it out.
Awesome. Well, I think in the spirit of participatory art making, we'd love to get questions from all of you, and especially from students. Thank you so much, Nathan and Sheila, for giving us some background on the biennial and your work. Does anyone want to kick it off? Yes.
Sheila, I'm a real fan of complicated installations.
Thank you.
And your installation, Now Our Minds Are One, where was that first set up?
So, in fact, was only set up, here. It was, I forgot. That one.
Sorry, and I'll just check. Did everyone hear the question? Because I can repeat as well.
Yeah, I'm having like this intimate conversation now.
Yeah.
So this exhibition was only set up at this time, so it's just coming down, and was set up at the Orlando Museum. And it's part of something that is called the Florida Prize for Contemporary Art. So each year, the Orlando Museum curator invites 10 Floridian artists to create an installation. So when she visited my studio 3 years ago, I had that in a digital sketch, and she asked me if I was going to build that. It was just after COVID, and I couldn't have materials, and I didn't have the space. So 3 years later, she reached out and she invited me for to set up the installation. So it's like 17 feet high by 20 by 20. It's 18 layers of cut-out acrylic, and it's based in the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which is 6 different nations from close to upstate New York, that in the 1800s they got together and they had a conversation about how it was important to take care of the waters, from the rivers, from the rains, from the creeks, and then they agree it was important to take care of the medicinal plants and the trees and the animals, and they go on, including the enlightened teachers, the creators, and at the end, they invite everyone to add onto this document with the closing words. So when I first looked at this document, I was like, wow, This is an incredible illustration of democracy, right? That we give the same value to the water that we give to the birds and the trees and so forth and so on, and how all these elements are so interconnected, and we can live with one or without another one. So what I did is I did a research on all endangered medicinal plants, animals, birds, and so forth and so on. And I cut out the pieces. Some of them, there's a curious thing. So I did a lot of research using AI, because you can get a lot of information really quick. But then I couldn't get images to 2 different endangered species. Only the Encyclopedia Britannica had them. So I reached out to, I reached out to everyone. I had photographers from National Geographic, Encyclopedia Britannica, a photographer in Jakarta. So I asked permission to use their images so I could create the vectors for the piece. So all the absolutely, I don't know, it's hundreds of pieces that I got copyright permission to use them for this project. So it was the first time. I never seen this project until we were installing. And then it just closed 2 weeks ago at the Orlando Museum. So now they are packing, and and we'll see where the next destination will be. Thank you.
Yes.
I have a quick question. You mentioned like formal aspects becoming like a bigger consideration in printmaking. I guess I wanted you to, where do you think that's like coming from, and where else do you kind of see this being kind of printmaking?
Sure. I have just a very short attention span, so I like loud visual things. Like there's some great printmakers that, I think of like Felix Gonzalez Torres, piles of paper that are like, there's nothing there to look at, but it's all an awesome idea. That's great. It's not what I would probably put in a show, even though he's an amazing artist. So, I just like I like loud visual things, and it acts as sort of like a glue. So if you have like a more political work and a more abstract work, and maybe the installation work, if it's pretty formal and like visually engaging, that's sort of a tie that binds. It's also a good way for me. I like to have like a formal bang to things to just engage the audience initially. So, they're going to see this. There's some formal qualities. I'm engaged, and now, this is talking about feminism, or it's talking about race. Then they can you can get under the hood of the maybe intellectual concept or the expression after that first like kind of formal hit on the head. Visual impact. Does that answer your question?
Or I'm also curious of like, is this something you're seeing outside of printmaking, or is it kind of like focused?
I would say my art interests, whether it be in painting and sculpture, I'm very much a visualist, and I gravitate towards work like that.
Yes, over there.
What kind of tools are modern screen printers using to get those like very large blown-up images? Are they using like massive screens?
Okay, the question is I'm going to repeat so everyone can hear. What kind of tools are modern screen printers using, especially to get really large images? Is that correct? Yeah.
Well, I can talk about that. So I work in a studio that was a corner studio by a legendary printmaker, Sheila Marbain, and she had trained the guys who were at the Brand X, a massive commercial shop. So basically, these young guys wanted to do the work that Sheila didn't want to do it anymore. So I taught at Pratt, and some of my Pratt students were like hand separating colors to print a massive chuck close that would be, I would say, maybe 12 feet by 8 feet, right? So incredibly massive pieces that are printed with, still hand printed, but, large vacuum presses, 128 colors. It's really incredible, right? So those massive prints were put in the market for $100,000 each, and the edition was 100. So the profit, the income, whatever, the sales was $1 million, right? So There is ways of making super large prints, even, screen prints. You need to have the space, you need to have either if it's going to be a hand separation color, or you won't have an exposure unit that's big unless if you use the sun, but it's less controllable. But this is one of the ways that we can do large screen prints.
Yeah. I think a lot of artists will also just take a larger image, break it down into tiles, and put each section of a tile on a smaller screen, and then you just have to carefully register them as you print them. Although I do recommend check out, if you Google Powerhouse Arts screen print, they have some great videos of people just printing with giant screens that are really fun.
And at the show, we have a very large piece at the back of the gallery, right, which was printed, and sometimes artists will print in different pieces of paper and stitch together or glue together. Everything goes, because if the power is in the image, the making process is only there to sustain the power of the image making.
That's very nice.
That's good. Power to the image.
Yes, in the front.
Kind of cycling back to what you were just speaking about in answering a different question, is it, when taking on the role of a curator, which both of you have done, is it important for you to differentiate your personal taste versus what you think is important to show? And if so, how do you go about doing that? Awesome.
Do you want to repeat that?
Yes, great question. So, yeah, well, you think. Okay. So the question is, when you're working as a curator, especially if you're an artist like these two, I won't claim that. How do you separate your personal taste from the aims of the show? What's important?
Yeah, I don't. Like, I bring a specific taste and expertise, and if people don't want that, that's fine. They don't come to the show, they don't have to host the show. I can only do this the one way. And I have to say, I was really thinking, like, I research art and artists, I contact artists, I bring the art in, I will arrange it in a show. That's kind of what a curator does, but I have no real curatorial background or practice. I'm a total, this is like DIY. Like, I'm not, like, Rachel has actually, like, formal training in this. I don't, and I just do what I do, and people like it enough that it's become a thing. So, I couldn't do it any other way.
I second that. I don't think you can, right? Because if you want to be honest with the work we do, the work you select, the work you hang in your house, it has to be through your lenses, right? So you already selected the message you want to tell, the story you want to tell. And the story you want to tell, it might be techniques that you don't know, it might be approaches you've never seen, but still it's integrous to your vision. So I don't think you can go to a place that's like, nah.
I'll chime in and just say, I think what's really exciting about this show, and I'm hoping that you'll all really, it's so punchy visually, and it's also just so different from some of the things that we've had on view here, and that's why it's really great to bring in an outside perspective, to bring in a show that, you have contacts in the print world that people that I've never met and artists that I wouldn't have thought of, and so it's really wonderful as an institution. We try to share our collection, but then we're also really trying to be a place where artists and the wider print world can come and be seen at the Turner, so I'm really excited that all of you get to experience the show. Okay. Leslie.
I have another question for Rachel.
Okay.
Screen printing is a relatively new print medium, right? We can say it kind of comes into its own in the 60s. Mm-hmm. I'm curious what the earliest screen prints are in the Turner's collection.
This is, just to repeat the question, asking about, screen print out of all of the printmaking mediums is relatively recent, sort of mid-20th century in the US. What are some of the earliest screen prints that we have in the collection here? And I actually had the pleasure of bringing out some things for Nathan today. We saw some Karita Kent's. Screenprint is a huge strength of our collection. Janet Turner was making screen prints herself, and she was really collecting work by her contemporaries. So we have quite a lot of work from the 50s, which is great. And we have a really strong sort of mid-20th century Japanese screen print collection because she traveled to Japan. She was engaged with Japanese artists, and that's an area that I really want to dive into because I think it hasn't necessarily been celebrated as much as we could do. But yeah, I don't know an exact date, but those 50s prints, we were looking at the Karita Kent, who is this incredible printmaking nun from Southern California. And you can just see this evolution, and the work that we were looking at from the 50s was completely different from the 60s, where it becomes much more sort of influenced by pop. You get a lot more work with typeface and lettering, and then the earlier work is she's just figuring out how to make this medium work for her. So, I'm hoping that we might be able to do an event later in this semester where we open up our archive and bring out some of the historic screen prints from the collection, and we also have some really exciting new acquisitions that I think would be great to showcase alongside what's on view in the gallery.
Rachel, can I just add something? Just for historical context, Screenprint really is like a 20th century art form in the U.S., but in non-Western cultures, in Japan and China, we see it in the 16th century. Yeah. The Hirshhorn has been doing some great discoveries of like really proto-screen print sort of work, and it was in the 20s that England, in classic colonial fashion, decided to patent the technology. But there's a very kind of mixed history that's going on.
Yeah, if any of you saw the kimono exhibition at the Anthropology Museum last year, they had a few examples of kimono stencils. And so there's, this whole history of stencil printing on textiles that really, has a long tradition.
And I will create a controversy with my dear colleagues. I think the first artwork we know in history, which is the Altamira, paintings, they were stencil prints, right? So I think the cave people just used their hands and pigment and being the hand the printing element. So I think, in fact, the first manifestation in history that we have in two-dimensional, because we were making tools at the time, but in two-dimensional art, I think the Altamira paintings were actually prints.
And I love that. All the printmakers erupt in applause.
Exactly. and I started all my classes asking, students if they ever made a print, and they very intimidated, and they maybe or whatever. And I'm like, no, you all did it, because when you are born, you have like your handprint, your footprint, you've done a print. So let's relax and make more, and then it's a great introduction.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. I've got Eileen. Oh. Okay, Dylan and then Eileen.
Both of you touched on your experiences with mediums outside of printmaking, and I'm just curious about your opinion on the importance of modern artists using mediums outside of their emphasis field.
So the question is about your sort of multidisciplinary angles working with mediums outside of printmaking, and how important is that for artists working today to be able to do that?
So I usually do any gallery talk talking about that I'm monogamic in my marriage, but I'm polygamic in my art. So I use prints, sculptures, installations, paintings, and this is everything in my toolbox, and I'll go to my toolbox and I'll bring anything I need in order to create the work I do. And, I just come home to the same place at the same person every night. But the work, it's always, and I think curiosity takes you to places, and then, and then when you're ready to move to the next, just welcome, learn, and, absorb it, and you'll be, I think, a more complete artist.
Yeah, I don't consider myself a printmaker. I'm an artist who makes a lot of prints. I gave a conference talk recently about how I stopped making art how I stopped making prints and started making art. So whether it's like playing in bands or making sculpture and installation, if you do something creative, it might make sense to make that part of your art practice. And then eventually you get kind of good at some things, and then you try something you're bad at. I recently had a bunch of wonderful ceramic failures, who here does ceramics? Okay, man, hats off to you folks. Like, I'm making stuff with mud, and it's trying to like make sense. That is so hard, but eventually you'll start like trying new things you're bad at, because you kind of get bored and you make these mistakes that turn into something interesting. So do everything, and you'll gravitate towards stuff you're good at, but then start pushing into things you're not good at, because that's where kind of the art sometimes will happen.
Eileen, would you like to ask the last question?
Yeah, well, I've had a lot of conversations with Sheila, but Nathan, I would love to know how your experience over the last 10 years looking at all of this work has shifted and changed your perspectives or directions in your own work, or if it has or if it hasn't.
Yeah, I think maybe the big takeaway I see is that everyone in in all the shows, whether they're super technical or less technical, everybody takes it really seriously, and everybody really burrows down deep into their respective corners and brings something new. And so it's given me the okay to waste time researching, going down rabbit holes. I look at other artists and say like, wow, they spent like 6 months on a project, 2 years on a project. Gives me the license to feel like, okay, I can do that. I can spend 2 years and experiment, and that's okay. So I've just been really inspired by all of the artists and all these myriad of ways that they dig deep and make discoveries, and but it takes time, work, patience, sometimes money, always effort, and realizing like there's many different places that these artists are drawing from, and yeah, just trying to take inspiration from that. And when I am feeling like the well is dry, I pick up an old catalog and I'll say like, oh, I forgot about this piece. So somebody doing this animation hybrid or this sculpture, I'm going to try some sculpture. So it's just a wealth of just getting inspired that I do not take for granted, and I know is a super privilege that I have.
Well, for me, it just broadened my curatorial research. You know, when I look at stuff and I think this is new to me, it's going to be incredibly new to my students and to the public in general. So for me, it's like a way of researching, getting to know the artists and bringing these artists into the realm of conversations, because sometimes, you know, we are like doing things in our corners, right? And until we have like this kind of opportunities, that's when we get to meet people alike. So it's part of my research is to look at what other people are doing, to think about what is the thinking process, technical process, approaches, etc., that makes me think, rock, and show my students where things are going. So I don't think it directly influences my work, but influences the way I look at the work that is made today and tomorrow.
I think we'll have to wrap up here, but I know you guys would be happy to answer plenty more questions over some food and drinks. So please join me in thanking Nathan and Sheila one more time. And I want to invite you all to head over to the Turner. I'll just give you one heads up that we're doing things a little bit differently from our typical receptions, which is just to protect all the amazing art in the show. We're going to have space in the University Art Gallery and outside where you can have food and drinks, but we're just asking that you don't bring them into the gallery itself. But please enjoy.